I'm really excited because we've got our guest here, Dag. He's going to be talking a little bit about Kaizen, and also Tracy here, who's going to be showing a little more about Defect Dojo. Today's event is called Kaizen for Your AppSec Program, and with that, I'll pass over to Dag to get started.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, should be sharing my screen now. Okay, yes, I'll be talking about Kaizen for your AppSec program. This talk was first delivered in the Global AppSec Conference in Barcelona earlier this year, and this is an adapted version that we'll talk about here today. But before I get into that, I have a question. I'm not sure if I can see the audience here, but I wonder if you have a spare room in your house. And I imagine when I asked this in a big room full of people, let's say 60% of people raise their hands. And then the next question is, think about your spare room. Does it look like room number A or does it look like room number B? I have a spare room in my house and it definitely looks more like room number A than room number B. What's going on in room number A is that, you have it on your to-do list to clean up that room at some point. You will at some point, tidy it up, organize everything and make it more livable. But as you don't have any guests coming right now, it's not for this week, it's not for today. And you might as well put another box of stuff there that you need to get out of the way. And like that, it just keeps on piling up. And as it keeps on piling up, the problem with the room becomes bigger and bigger, and therefore the likeliness of you wanting to take it on becomes smaller and smaller until maybe your mother-in-law comes over for a few days visit, and then you will have to. Another thing that is somewhat similar to this is what I would call surface creep. I don't know if close to your door in your house, you have kind of like the top of a cupboard or a kind of table where you keep your car keys and maybe gloves and shawls and glasses and more and more and more and more things. And actually, all surfaces in a house have a tendency to get occupied by things if you don't keep them organized and clean. You may be wondering where I'm getting at with all of this. Well, this was my personal journey of how I got onto Kaizen, but I'll get to that first. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Dag Flachet. I'm originally from Belgium, but I've lived in Barcelona for quite a while now. I'm a co-founder of Codific, the company behind the SAMM tool, and I have a doctorate degree in business administration, specialized in organizational behavior. So I'm more of a psychologist in background, but I got into AppSec about 10 years ago, let's say. I also teach sometimes for the Geneva Business School, where I'm also on the board of directors. And I'm active in OWASP SAMM and the OWASP Barcelona chapter. And I'm a messy person. If left to myself or left without any guiding systems, my house would become very, very messy in no time. And so does all of my other things. Which is why I was really interested in some of the principles of Kaizen. I came across them when I was preparing for a course. I was asked to provide an introductory course at a business school on lean methodologies. So I was browsing around and looking at different lean methodologies. And I came across Kaizen and more specifically the 5S, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I was really fascinated. In Kaizen, like in many of the Japanese lean methodologies, it's not just methodology, but it's kind of a crossover between methodology, philosophy, and habits, or actually, I should say, habits, methodology, and philosophy. So by developing certain habits, you change the way you think about things, and that becomes kind of the incremental change in your approach to a problem. So there's a crossover between methodology, habits, and philosophy. What does Kaizen really mean? Well, it's Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. I also don't know if this is actually the right science, but somebody who speaks Japanese told me it is. But it's the combination of the words change and good. So it is good change or change for good, literally. Like most quality control systems, you typically have a circular thing, it is not a linear improvement process, but it is something that you keep on repeating. In Kaizen, the 6 steps is identifying the problem, analyzing the current processes, creating the solution, testing the solution, measuring the results, and then standardizing the solution. And then you're back at the beginning. You're back at the start. But the thing that really fascinated me was the 5S. The 5S are 5 activities that you designate a special time slot for. So in my case, I would do this every morning for 15 minutes. Actually, I did it this morning for 15 minutes as well. And that means typically before you start working, you're not allowed to actually sit down and do any work. But during this 15 minutes or half an hour, you can take whatever time slot you want. You are only allowed to do one of these 5 activities. And this is with your workplace in mind. So I'll start with my home office, with my desk, with the shelves around my desk. And instead of trying to solve everything all at once, like that big room you have there, you identify one box, one shelf, or one thing that you're going to really tackle and resolve. The first step is sort, throw away all the stuff you don't need. Clutter accumulates, and so you need to get rid of a lot of things. Then assign a logical location for the items. What is on your desktop? Do you really need those things on your desktop? What is in the first shelf? Do you really need those items there? And then shine, which is a bit surprising here because how much can you really shine your desktop, or how much can you really shine your workplace? But the idea is uh, that the shining is kind of also a meditational thing, a contemplation thing, where you don't really know what to do next, but you'll just polish a little bit and then think about how you're working and whether actually the way you're set up makes sense, or is there any way you can make things more efficient. And then you standardize the process, and you be persistent. You develop a culture of continuous improvement. So you try to have some systems in place, and you do this every day or every week or whatever the time frame is. In my case, it's 15 minutes every day. So that was my solution to the home chaos, and it's still chaotic in some places, but a lot of it is amazingly organized now. I have systems for cables. I have system for all kinds of items, and I actually know where items are now. In my previous house I was living in, I didn't know where anything was. Now, how many rooms are there to clean up in our AppSec program? As we were working with AppSec programs, and specifically, typically my organization the first point of contact when somebody starts working with OWASP SAMM and needs some tooling to scale implementation of OWASP SAMM. I very often get these arguments. If I had the right resources to resolve all these problems, there's a lot of things I would do, but currently I have to pick my battles because I have limited resources, and therefore there are certain rooms that I don't enter. I cannot deal with those things right now because there's too many other urgent things I have to deal with, and I need to address those. So coming to think of that, I see the parallels between the Kaizen methodology and developing a continuous improvement methodology for your AppSec program. Another problem that arises is that we're kind of putting out fires all the time. Yes, you would like to iteratively improve your application security program, and you would like to do all of these things, but there's always something that's on fire. Something came out that some process is not up to par, some people didn't do their training, some threat modelings weren't done correctly, and you're running after all kinds of activities that you need to do. Whereas you solve one thing, you go to the next thing, and meanwhile, other things start to degrade, and you lose track of everything being well under control. So that's where the value of a framework such as OWASP SAMM or OWASP DSOM really comes in. SAMM stands for Software Assurance Maturity Model, and it is a structured inventarization of all the best practices you should be doing. And it's structured as a maturity model. So for all of these 15 activities here, There are 3 levels of maturity. There are also 2 streams, so there's 30 activities in total. And basically, it's like the catalog of all the things you should be doing, but then not just like binary, like you did it or you didn't do it, but it goes from you didn't do it at all to you have it a little bit, you have it really well, and you have it world-class quality deployed. And it has the quality criteria for everything. So with that, it allows you to keep track of everything you're doing, and it allows you to quantify those little shelves, boxes, or things that you can address all at once while keeping an eye on the other things not to drift. So what are the advantages of the maturity model? Well, a lot of ISMS may be built around compliance frameworks like ISO 27001. But then if you get compliant with ISO or you get compliant with SOC 2, then what? Where do you go from there? Whereas with the maturity model, you can really build roadmaps with different stages, depending on the level of maturity and also depending on the risk context of the application and the business environment that you are in. So you can really fine tune the objectives and the investments to the environment that you're in. The other thing which is really good with this finite, and it looks quite big, but in the end it's not that big. It gives kind of like a common vocabulary and a common taxonomy to the people at the organization in order to see the map of where we are and what the activities are, what we are supposed to be doing, and what the quality criteria of having done something properly are. That way, if different teams are self-assessing how well they're doing on application security, they come out with comparable answers instead of having a subjective narrative saying we're doing very well because we did a lot of threat models or we have security champions in place and therefore things are good. And as I mentioned before, we can break things down into small steps, and that makes it really good for something like a iterative approach like in Kaizen. And it is the map of the situation, the map of everything that's going on and where we are and where we are going. Another advantage here is that if all the teams have visibility on the whole map, they don't need to know everything on the map, but you can show them the scoring and you can show them how the scoring of the team, business unit, or whatever the scope is improving over time. And this creates more buy-in for different requirements being given to them at different times. If not, if they have no visibility on that and you're the security person coming to the team and saying, you need to do A, B, and C in order to have good security, they hopefully will do A, B, and C. And then next quarter you come back and now you need to do D, E, and F. But you just told me I have to do A, B, and C, and I did A, B, and C. Now we have to do D, E, and F. Like, how many points are there? We're just gonna keep making stuff up. With a map like OWASP SAMM, you have a good picture of everything we could be doing, should be doing, and where we are on that map and where we're going. So another nice thing you can do with it is iterate on a stream level. So a stream is basically one activity on this map. There's 30 streams in OWASP SAMM, but you could as well be using OWASP DSAM, which is a little bit more granular for the SDLC. Basically what you do is each one of these streams gets their own life cycle, and each one of these get their own improvement roadmap. So you see this flow chart also has a circular flow, just like the Kaizen flow chart, where you first evaluate, then you validate, you check if the self-evaluation was correct. If there's a second person involved, that is optional. And then you decide whether or not this is good enough. If it's not, you pick an improvement track, you implement the improvement track, and when the improvement track is complete, you come back to the beginning and you reevaluate the stream. It's important that you don't have to go through the whole framework in order to do the iterations, but the iterations can live by themselves on the different streams. That makes it much more lightweight to improve upon your posture and make little steps forward without having to go ask the team 90 questions again. So how does that look like in the terms of the 5S? Well, the sorting is basically the these SAM assessments, you get rid of all the unnecessary fluff, and you have a objective set of items and quality criteria that we care about. If it's not in the SAM model, we don't care about it. If it should be in the SAM model and it's not, then you should let us know, because there's a version 3 coming out soon, and we're currently collecting information and opinions and insights in order to make the model more complete where it should be missing. But it's pretty exhaustive. But the nice thing is that it simplifies things and quantifies things, so you're not excessively spending time and energy in fluff. And then one thing you can do in SAM or in DSOM is set target postures, is set objectives, and the objectives are not an overall score, but it's a posture with the different levels. And typically companies will have a target posture for different types of business units or teams. Let's say a low risk web customer facing app, a high risk web customer facing app, internal IT systems, embedded devices, etc. Each one of these have like they have a library of target postures that are the goals that the team should be aspiring to. And then whatever you score on a certain stream can also expire. That means that instead of having to do the whole assessment every year or every 2 years, you only have to reassess if something expired, or if you went through an improvement process and you have to reevaluate this process. This means that the burden on the teams is much lighter. And then the biggest return on investment we see where companies implement roadmaps and do this recurringly. So like I spent 15 minutes cleaning up my house or my desk or whatever I'm cleaning up, those 15 minutes, the same way you want to allocate a certain amount of resources per month, per quarter, in order to gain some points in the overall map. And finally, because everybody has more visibility and more insight onto what we're doing and where we're going, this encourages bottom-up engagement and creates more buy-in and initiative from teams. Very often we see that after the first assessment, after seeing their posture, teams are like, oh, but I see these activities here and those quality criteria. Actually, that is something we can do. We have the tools and the know-how in the house to actually improve those processes ourselves. We don't necessarily have to wait for somebody from security or somebody from the top to tell us to do this. We can take control of that. So this is how it looks like in the Kaizen circle then. So you identify the goals. These are the business goals. Then you do the SAM assessment, you set the roadmap and the target postures, you implement the improvements, and then you need to measure if things are working. And I'll come back a little bit on that afterwards. But you want to do the SAM assessment and you want to have some more empirical data, not so abstract as the SAM assessment. And then you update the target posture and the documentation and you start over again in an iteration. So side effects may include greater visibility on situation and goals. This is bottom up, but also top down. Typically the executive board or team or whoever, the highest person in application security, the director of application security or whatever the role is, needs to report about the state of application security to a person or committee or a board that is maybe less well versed in application security and does not want to see too complex things, but they want to see clear metrics of where we are, where we're going, and have visibility on that. As I mentioned, it triggers bottom-up initiatives and it can trigger greater engagement and foster participatory leadership. So it's the way of working like this encourages the different stakeholders to work together in order to decide together which is the next thing we can do. Rather than me forcing it down your throat that you need to do A, B, and C, we can sit together and see, look, this is the target posture. This is where we eventually need to get to. What are the first steps we can take? Where do you think you can quickly implement, quickly improve, and make some big strides towards this objective? And on a more philosophical level, for the people involved, this gives more agency and more purposeful work. There's nothing worse than having work pushed to you without seeing the big picture and without understanding the why of the work. But it's much nicer if you understand the why, you understand where we're going and how you are engaged here. But then the big question is, does it really improve security? This is a question we've often seen asked at the end of the track. Let's say we start with a SAMM assessment and the average score in the first assessment tends to be around 1.2. The overall industry benchmark is around 1.4. This is out of 3, by the way. So if I'm at 1.2 or I'm at 1.3 or I'm at 1.5, is that good? Is that bad? And let's say I go to 1.6 or 1.7. Looks nice. It's like gamified a bit, but did it really improve security? Did I really solve anything? And this is where the bottom up and the top down approach need to meet each other. So OWASP SAMM is a very abstract and process oriented approach to everything you're doing, but it doesn't measure. Well, it's usually interview based, so you talk about the processes and the way the processes are implemented, but we don't have good metrics on actual risk and the risk mitigation that is being created there. This is where bottom-up tools like Defect Dojo come in, and I'm going to hand over to Tracy to talk about that. That got me remembering another methodology that the Japanese like to do that originated in Toyota is to ask why 5 times. They started at Toyota at the production facilities where they were looking at defects and they don't want to have defects, or if there are defects, they want to catch them as early as possible, which is kind of like the same as shift left what we are doing here. So if there's a dent in the car or there's a misalignment of panels, why did it happen? Well, because the machine misaligned it. Why did the machine misalign it? Is it a problem with the machine? Is it a problem with calibration? Is it a problem with physical spacing, with training, whatever? So if you ask why 5 times, then you finally get to the root cause of the problem. So the same thing we could do here, and it's a little bit what your LLM was getting at. It's like, okay, which are the really fundamental things we could change here in order to prevent these things from happening? Yes, okay, so you could ask, why did it have a critical vulnerability? It was a log4j vulnerability that was in the Apache server. Why am I getting that? Why don't I have a good inventory of all of the components? Is it because I don't have a good inventory of all the components I have? Is it because I don't have good SCA scanners? Is it because I don't have an approved set of components that developers are allowed to use? And so if you keep asking the questions, eventually you'll come back up to the SAM practices and the things you need to invest in. A little bit like your LLM was also suggesting, what are the underlying trainings or the underlying process changes, tool changes that may actually lead to a significant improvement here. But the nice thing is also that it goes both ways. So it also goes the other direction. If you did invest in new tooling and you did invest in new training and so on, you could measure how many less critical vulnerabilities, how many less risk exposing incidents have happened proportionally to whatever is relevant. And thereby you can demonstrate ROI on the investment you're making from a process level. This is something that we've seen happen in very large corporations. There are some internal metrics for those corporations, but I'm not allowed to share them. But if anybody in the audience would like to do a kind of an academic exercise around this and like demonstrate how different changes in processes actually show different vulnerabilities happening down the line, then we'll be very happy to do that. Please reach out to me. So to come back to the conclusion, With the Kaizen techniques, we turn the big problems into small steps and we make an iterative improvement process in order to grow forward. We can systematically iterate towards better security, and we rely on vulnerability measurements to see impact and to demonstrate return on investment of those improvements in processes. That was our talk for today. Thank you very much for joining. I saw there were some questions that went into the chat. I don't know if Chris, you want to go over them. I've read them actually, so I could jump into them if you like.
Yeah, let's do it. So the first question we got to is, um, what is your
Was
recommendation
real
in terms of scope?
scoping.
Yeah, let's actually let me double check. Yeah. What is your
Yes,
recommendation in terms of scope? Is it better to do it for specific teams, application as service, or the entire org?
that's an excellent question. And if you go to owaspsam.org on the blog, there's a whole section on it, and it depends. There's no one size fits all. But what we see that you can also scope on different levels. So you don't need to just cut the organization in, let's say, application teams and do it like that, but you can do application teams, business unit, and whole organization. And you can also cascade the scores. So let's say you have 5 application teams within one business unit. You can do the SAM assessment of those teams. And then you would have an average SAM score of that business unit. And then you can also compare the business units. You can do pretty much whatever you want. We've seen business units, rather big business units that are kind of like a whole business on their own. We've seen application teams. We've see as long as they're kind of working in the same technological stack and the same pipelines, I don't think it makes sense to split it up further. You could do it at product level, but that's less common, especially if one team is working on 2 products, then probably keep it related to the team. But yeah, that's the first step of your SAM assessment is to figure out what makes sense for you, and probably also start with one scope, the one team that is kind of more mature and engaged, so that you get an early win. You get to demonstrate some kind of outcomes in order to get more acceptance into the other teams. The second follow-up question I see there is relating the questionnaire. We've seen both things happen. So you could send the questionnaire to people, or you can send it per Google Sheets, or even better, use the SAMI tool, which exists in an open source version or a freemium version. But we don't see the best engagement with just giving people the questionnaire. We see the best results with a conversation with the teams. And these conversations are kind of like coaching conversations. They're not really an audit. You want to stay away from it feeling like an audit, but you want it to be a kind of conversation about, okay, what are the processes like? What are we doing? And then based on that, together, we will identify some gaps that we could work on. This works better because then, yeah, it feels less like an exam, feels less like a test. And the person who is doing the assessment, be it internal from the AppSec team, or if you bring in an external assessor, they also typically have a little bit more experience with the framework, with what is expected with the questions, and how to interpret the question in a different technological context. For example, embedded devices, sometimes people get struggle on how to interpret the SAM processes and under embedded devices. So the first assessment can be conversational format, and then you also build the trust and the vocabulary, the know-how. And then after that, you can just self-assess the streams because they've kind of been trained already on how to assess things.
Nice. Great answers and great questions coming in. I guess a follow-up question to that. Is Eng is our biggest stakeholder for security. What have you seen work in order to get developers and really engineering as a whole like on board with security programs? How do you really change and sort of have them become more security advocates? And also in terms of the SAM like assessment, right? How do you get them looped in so that they get excited about it and actually become part of the process? Let me start with you, Dag, and I guess Tracy too. Love to get your response if you've heard any customers like, or users, ask about that as well.
Yeah, well, what I really like and what I think a lot of people really like in SAM and having a nice overview of the processes and the things we're doing in SAM is that you're not treating people like little kids that are too dumb to understand what we're dealing with here. You're telling them the picture, you're telling them everything we're working on, you're telling them where we are going, and you're trusting them to see it, and that gets more buy-in from them. An interesting case we saw recently was a big European railroad company where they had about 200 application teams, and they use it some entirely bottom up. They don't even check their work or anything. They just let everybody do a self-assessment on SAM. They get the scores, they get to compare, and then based on that, they ask, okay, what do you want to work on? And they're like, well, we see that actually we don't have good vulnerability management system, but actually the central office has tooling for that, and it's available for you guys. Pick it up. And that way it really becomes bottom up because you give the agency back to the team instead of treating them like kids.
Yeah. I would the only thing I would add to that is the beauty of SAM and having implemented some maturity models in various companies in the past, it allows you to identify the unique things in your environment, right? If you kind of look at SAM and you apply it to your environment, there are going to be different things that are going to be of interest or areas where you see that could be an improvement. And I think also when you think of like a big job like vulnerability management, which is kind of specific to security but impacts everybody, and is so audited by regulatory, all the different, ISO and GDPR and all the different regulations that have to be followed. It's one of those things that really propels a lot of those maturity levels. There's a lot of areas of SAM that Defect Dojo contributes to. And in fact, we're even working on a more detailed map of every single one of those elements that we can apply different functionality from Defect Dojo to contribute to every one of those maturity levels. So it's one of those tools that once you have it in place, it will help you leapfrog your maturity in different areas for things like SAM. So I think the combination of, picking the right tools that supports your efforts in your unique environment, that's the magic place of being, using something like SAM to identify and work on those individual pieces, like cleaning my room.
Nice. And actually super relevant because the CRA is definitely a big one. So that's probably a pretty good catalyst if you're in your org, you're AppSec engineer if one, you're talking to your CISO, and the CRA is probably a good way to sort of talk about and start this conversation about, hey, how do we increase our security practice overall? So love that. Which is very
Yeah.
coincidental because next week we actually happen to have office hours on the CRA. So if you're in town or I guess virtual, be sure to join us there. I'll throw in the link. And I also threw in the link for the SAM assessment too. If you haven't already seen it, definitely check it out as well. And even looking at the
We
getting started guide is helpful.
Regarding CRA, we have target postures for CRA as well, which is basically turned CRA into all the processes you should have in some terminology. You can find that on sami.codific.com. And basically, that means if you do your SAM assessment and then you link it to the CRA target posture, it tells you the gaps. It tells you you need these, and these processes. You maybe need to go look for some tools here, and there. And it's really useful right now in those year and something we have left before we really need to be ready to get people to start preparing and identifying what else is needed.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I don't see any questions come in. I guess maybe we can do like a final thoughts. Dag, love to start with you. Like, we talked about a little bit CRA, but I guess in general, like if you're an AppSec engineer at a company, you're a very small team. Like, how do you how do you take the SAM and sort of run with it? Like, what are some like the quick steps that you can take to sort of like make it impactful on your org?
Um, that's a good question. Let's see a quick getaway, takeaway. I think you have to um, basically first talk about it with your team and start doing. If you're a really small team, you can just do it yourself. Probably like if you're a small company, you know the processes. If you're a technical lead at the company, you can just start filling it out yourself. And then with all the scores and the dashboards, you can drive the conversation and you can really show where we're at, where we're going. And then the big takeaway from here is link it to DefectDojo or your vulnerability management system and show which things in SAMM correlate to which vulnerabilities happening less or which kind of issues being prevented. And so you have less work cleaning up and more fundamental process improvements.
Nice. And Tracy, what any final thoughts about how does your org implement SAMM?
I think Dag said it perfectly. You can't do it all at once. You know, there's going to be some obvious pain points that you're probably already in your head right now of things that maybe even inspiring you to, start pursuing something like SAMM. I think actually the one key thing I would recommend is, or talk about is that sometimes people will go in saying, we need to implement SAMM. And you don't really want to just implement it for SAM's sake, right? You want to improve your software development and your security posture. So it doesn't mean you have to try to always achieve a, level 3 maturity. It's there to identify, here's the things that we know we need to cover and steps to cover them. To raise the maturity level that you want or that is satisfactory for your environment. So you don't have to do the whole thing, but it definitely will help you use, find the things that you want to identify, may give you some ideas of things that you hadn't thought about, or preparing for regulatory exams, those kind of things. So I think, yeah, start small, start with those small steps. And if you find that you're missing certain tools to help, aggregate data from lots of different systems, yes, of course, think of Defect Dojo.
Yeah. And it looks like definitely resonating with folks with one comment here. I love the don't treat them like kids mentality. I think this is one of the main issues that demotivates dev teams when it comes to implementing security. So don't come down them and from top down. It's a very much seems like it bottoms up, treat them as human beings.
I have seen developers cry like kids though. So it can happen.
Yeah, when the security issues coming through Jira and they have to maintain Jira, that's usually when people start crying. My experience at least. Nice. Well, hey, I want to thank everyone here for joining us for today's webinar. It is being recorded. We'll share the recording link out later today. Big thanks to Dag and Tracy here for joining us in the Codific team. I post the link too. Check out the website. Look them up on LinkedIn. Definitely some great folks there. We've also got the CRA office hours happening next week too. So be sure to join us there. Greg's going to be giving an awesome presentation about what things you consider, and also talk about our new features, including the Kev enrichment as well. That's basically brand new. And with that, thanks everyone for joining us for today, and we'll hope to see you in the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.